My name is Byron Johnson. I direct the Institute for Studies of Religion at Baylor University. And you've heard a little bit about a partnership earlier today between Baylor University, the Institute for Studies of Religion that I direct with Rodney Stark, and the Religious Freedom Project. Let me just say how delighted we are on the Baylor side to be joining in this partnership with our good friends at the Religious Freedom Project. Tom Farr and Tim Shaw and I have been in discussions for the last 3 years, so we're delighted about this partnership, and we hope that it will last for many years. We were with the Pope recently. We had a private audience with the Pope in December when we did a conference in Rome, and the Pope got a real chuckle out of our partnership. And so I was glad that we made him smile when he heard that Baptists and Catholics were coming together to pursue religious liberty. And I was also glad to hear Alan Dershowitz say that he was delighted about the same partnership. So who knows will be the next dignitary to put their blessings on our partnership. This panel, Is Religious Freedom Good for Business and the Poor, is going to be a little bit different than what you've heard. There are no attorneys on the panel. Thank you. At our shop at the Institute for Studies of Religion, we have political scientists, sociologists, psychologists, historians. We even have our own epidemiologist, Jeff Levin, who's with us today. We study religion. We're mainly number-crunching social scientists, so we look at religion to see if it affects health, if it affects individuals, kids, adults, families, communities, society, the poor, prisoners. We invariably find that religion is associated with remarkably positive outcomes. It's good for people, it's good for groups. In fact, we've been trying to do studies that would show religion is harmful, just to get some publicity, but we have not been able to demonstrate that. We're working on it. We've been praying about it. Some of you believe in intercessory prayer, please help us. Today's panelists, let me introduce them to you today. Sister Deidre Byrne is going to be sitting to my left. And I was so delighted to get a chance to meet her because we've talked on the phone and we've exchanged emails. And if you haven't had a chance to read her bio, I'll give you just a little bit of it here. She is a fully professed religious sister with the Little Workers of the Sacred Heart, right here in Washington. Prior to joining the order, Sister Dee attended Georgetown University Medical School. She later held a general surgery internship at Georgetown University Hospital. She worked in the Army for 29 years and retired in 2009 at the rank of colonel. In fact, I'm surprised you're not an attorney as well, Sister Dee. She has traveled all over the world. She has taken vows of poverty and chastity and obedience, as well as a private fourth vow to work and provide free and loving medical care to the poor and uninsured, right here in Washington, D.C., at the Spanish Catholic Center, but also around the world. She has served in Kenya and Haiti, Dominican Republic, and the Sudan. So she's going to bring a unique perspective on our topic this afternoon. Next to her is Brian Grimm. Many of you will know Brian and his work. For many years, he was with the Pew Research Center conducting cross-national studies of religion. And his work is really well respected. And now Brian has launched out and formed a new foundation, actually, Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. But he will continue to do the same work, religious demography. He has written a couple of important books on this topic. Most recently, he is co-author with Roger Finke of The Price of Freedom Denied, Religion, Persecution, and Conflict in the 21st Century. So we're delighted to have Brian with us. To Brian's left is Anthony Gill, yes, the guy wearing the cowboy hat. Tony is a longtime friend. He's a professor of political science at the University of Washington. He's also a distinguished senior fellow at ISR and has been working with us for a number of years. He also works closely with the team at Georgetown. And he has written several important books also related to this topic. One is The Price of Freedom Denied. I'm sorry, that's Brian's book. Actually, Tony wrote it, and then
I read the good version of it. My price is a little bit lower.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Tony's two books, The Political Origins of Religious Liberty and Rendering Unto Caesar, the Catholic Church and the State in Latin America. And he also does Research on Religion podcast. This is where he does his impersonation of Dick Cavett and other people, where he interviews both everyday people and scholars alike on religion, and to make it accessible for everyday people. And Tony's been doing this now for several years, and we really appreciate that. And then last on the panel is Rebecca Shaw, who's here at Georgetown University in the Berkeley Center and the Religious Freedom Project. She's been doing great research recently on entrepreneurship and economic development in the modern world. She's the principal investigator on a research project that's looking at the effects of tithing and thrift on the enterprising poor, especially in India, and that project is funded by the Templeton Foundation. So we're delighted to have all of these panelists here, and I'm going to kick the ball off by asking a question to Tony Gill. Tony, the title of our panel is Religious Liberty Good for Business? Is it?
Yeah, religious liberty is good for business because religion is a business. And that might rub some people the wrong way here. People might be thinking that I'm comparing religious organizations to something that just sells snake oil or something like that. They're only in it for the money. Some of you might be pleased to hear that. You might think that's what religions do. I don't necessarily think that's the case, although there have been some snake oil salesmen throughout history. Some of you might also be rubbed the wrong way when I say religion is a business because you think that there is a difference between the sacred and the secular. And what I want to do today through this conversation is try to erase that distinction, because what I am coming to do today is not so much defend religious liberty per se, but defend liberty writ large. And the important thing of understanding how religious liberty is good for business is that the same liberties that we seek for religious liberty are the ones that also make business successful. And to compartmentalize religious liberty from our other liberties is a very dangerous thing that I believe will erode our general liberties and then will affect religious liberty. And if I could just take a moment to explain that and why I see religion as a business, it's important. As myself, I owe allegiance to God. I praise God every day for all the great things that God has given me. But nonetheless, I realize that I can't do it alone. I'm responsible for my personal salvation. I have no problem with that, but I can't do it alone. I need other people around me to help me out and do that. I need people to share the joy that God has given me, and I need congregants. And I'm a busy person otherwise, and I can't do all the things that I need to fully understand my faith in God. And so I need people who specialize in that. I need priests, I need pastors, rabbis, imams, we need all those folks. And so there's a necessity for religion. Religion is a very social part of our lives. I know some people say, well, religion's a very personal thing. But when you look at it, all the great religions, all the successful religions throughout society have been communal, and they need to come together. They need to aggregate in churches, in mosques, in synagogues, and other places. And that requires a number of liberties beyond just the right to believe as you think. There are folks here that say, well, it's liberty of conscience, and you can believe what you want in your own head. But in order to act upon those beliefs in your own head, you come together with other individuals and form these religious organizations, and you need things like private property rights, the ability to build a place, to meet, to do with that property as you best see fit, to enter into contracts with pastors and other employees and with other individuals within your congregation. All of these things are rights and are personal liberties that are very essential into building business as well. And if we lose sight of that and we compartmentalize just religious liberty, thinking of it only as a personal right of conscience, that's very dangerous, because what will happen over time is that we will slide into this belief that we can regulate and take away some of the liberties of other entities, of other businesses, and hopefully that won't affect us at all. But it does come around to bite us eventually, that the more you restrict liberties for the business community, the bigger the state, the bigger the government that will grow, the more taxation that the government will need to run its various bureaucracies. And that's going to have a big, profound influence on churches and other religious organizations, because churches don't pay taxes as much. They compete with the government for a lot of other different social services that are provided. And it might come down to the point where the government says, well, we don't need churches as much. We're doing all these other things, and we'll start to erode those liberties. And I think that has been happening in the last several years, and we might discuss more about how that happens. But that's my initial salvo. I'm here to defend liberty and not just religious liberty.
Okay, great. Brian, you have done work recently on testing the religious economies theory. And for most people in this room, they're not going to be familiar with that theory, and maybe you could present the theory and then the data behind the theory and what you're finding when you look at countries around the world.
Yes, be glad to. But I did ask permission if I could take
Yes.
a poll first.
Yes,
Is that
let's
okay?
do the poll.
As a researcher,
We're social scientists. That's
as
what
a
we get to do.
researcher, so I was at the Human Rights Council in Geneva a couple weeks ago, and I did the same poll. And I'm hoping today for better results. All right, so I have a business card, and this isn't part of the poll, it's just a site test. And on the back of my business card, I have 4 triangles. And of course, you can't read it, but the middle one says religious freedom. And then on the bottom right, it says civil society, including religious groups and others. And then the other one says governments. And that's usually who gets together and talks about this issue of religious freedom. So at the UN, I just took a poll. How many of you are from government agencies or work with the government? So same poll here. How many are with the government or a government agency? We won't take any pictures, but okay. And then how many are from civil society? So religious groups no, not including business. Let me pull back the business card. Because my third triangle at the top are the people that weren't at the Human Rights Council. I ask, and how many are from business? And this is 1,000 times better than it was at the Human Rights Council. I spoke at the UN a few weeks ago in New York at the US Embassy at a packed room, maybe twice as many people as are here today, and I didn't have a single business person. And so that's part of the message. I think that's coming out of the religious economies, which I'll share some data points, but that not only is religious freedom good for business, not only is religious freedom good for business, but business is good for religious freedom. It works both ways. And maybe as we talk, I'll explain those ideas. But the data are overwhelming on several points. First, that we've seen a rising tide of restrictions on religion around the world, coming both from governments and from groups in society. So social intolerance, religious hostilities ranging from terrorism to not loving your neighbor has swept the world. And that's what Tom Farr began by sharing, that 76% of the world's people live in countries with high or very high restrictions on religious freedom. But the other work, looking at this, what's going on in the world, how do you make sense of that? What does this mean? The book that you mentioned that I did with Roger Finke at Penn State looked at what are the connections between actions governments do, actions people do, and this religious violence that we're seeing. And what we found was that as people in society try to make their society just my religion and none others, that has a relationship with government actions, and governments respond to that and reinforce that. They sort of build this coalition of intolerance, and when that is set in place, religious violence is the result. So looking at the data, these connections are clear, and then solution to that, or the anecdote to that, is religious freedom. So where people in society respect your neighbor's faith, and where governments guard that respect, then you see less religious violence. So that's the first model that's been tested in the religious economies model of how deregulation can lead to greater freedom, less intolerance. But the data also show clear connections between where religious freedom is practiced, then you have better business environments. You have more trust within a company when a company respects religious freedom. You have an environment where innovation and ideas are stronger. For instance, where there's religious freedom, you see twice as much innovation in that economy as you see in places where there isn't religious freedom or where religious freedom is low. And part of that is just think of what it is, what religious freedom means. It means that you're set free to dream, that your ideas are that motivate your faith that motivates you to do something good for someone else. Can motivate a business to do what we've been talking about with Hobby Lobby today. That this faith inspires me to do something good for my fellow man, and sometimes that's profitable. But and then that profit itself gives people jobs and gives people the ability to develop their own lives. So where religious freedom functions, the full person, the full capacity of people is set free then to engage and help societies. And if I can give one anecdote, one personal anecdote that I've shared on other occasions is for years, and I have 4 kids, and 3 were born in China, and 2 of the 3 that were born in China are here with me today, a doctor and a nurse, and we've had a nice conversation with them. But the anecdote is they were raised in Saudi Arabia. They were raised in Muslim countries for the most part, China, Muslim parts of China. And I noticed, and this is what got me into the religious economies model, was that when I was in a country where I could not practice my own faith, I lost interest in working hard for that country. So, for instance, when we were in Saudi Arabia, it was illegal to be a Christian. I would be fired if I said Merry Christmas. The only place we could go to worship was behind barbed wires at the U.S. Embassy. And we had to sort of brave that trip to go across town. And I just thought, I just want to get my family out of here. I don't have an interest in this. And then some years later, we worked right across the border in the United Arab Emirates, also a Muslim majority country, but where religious freedom was not perfectly respected, but we could have our church. We could go to church. We could practice our faith. And my motivation to serve in that capacity and see good come was transformed. It was night and day between those 2 places. So at the personal level, I see it, and these personal experiences of working in many of these countries led me to think, this isn't just my own experience, but I think this is how the world works. And then that's what motivated the research I've done in looking at these connections.
Great.
Yeah.
Becky Shaw, let me ask you this question. There's a view held by some that religious freedom may lead to the denial of other liberties and opportunities, for example, education and employment, and thus hinder development, not help development. How pervasive is that view?
Well, Byron, it's very pervasive. Am I wrong? It's a very pervasive view. I've been in the field of development for 20 years, and I've been at the World Bank, and the view that religion is detrimental to development was held there for a very long time, until Jim Wolfenson came and he set up the Faith and Development Office. Even then, people of faith, or those who wanted to include faith in development projects, were sort of tolerated. There's also the view, and the prevailing view, and what informs this view? Well, one is there is a belief among development practitioners and scholars that the poor are sort of passive victims of dubious ideologies. They, that conversion that happens in the parts of the world that I work in is a Western artifact. Western missionaries are going out there and converting people, when in fact, studies have shown, and there's a lot of data on this, that conversion is taking place because of indigenous missions, for the most part. And there is another very pervasive view, a view that informs this belief that religious liberty is detrimental to development, and that is the view that, patriarchy is ingrained in all the world religions, and therefore, if one has this view that religion violates human rights, religion subjugates women. Now, religious liberty is not a panacea, Byron. By no means it is. But what it is, and that's the beauty of religious freedom. And there are religions where, there are certain aspects of certain religions where it is very patriarchal and it does subjugate women. But the beauty of religious freedom is that it enables people to critique their religion to reform their religion, to exit from a religion, which is taking place in parts of the world that I work in, where there are very repressive forms of patriarchy and women are exiting the religion. And so yes, it's a prevailing view, but the beauty of religious freedom is that it's there to enable people to have choice. So,
Great, thank you. All right, Sister Dee Dee, I'm coming to you. Now,
That's a nice hat, by the way.
Thank you. It covers the gray better.
I've read your bio to people, and I think they may have already had a chance to read it. By the way, she was deployed to Afghanistan for her last stint in the Army because she wanted to be there for the troops. And so I just thought maybe you have to tell us about your journey, okay? So we'll just hit the pause button and let you tell us about your journey.
Okay, well, hopefully it'll be short. But first I want to just say that Mother Teresa always said that her business in religion was to bring the love of Christ. So my mother always said that my vocation started in utero. I'm one of 8 children. My mom's here right now.
Where is she?
91-year-old mother. And my youngest brother...
Yeah!
My parents were very devout Catholics. My father was a thoracic surgeon and worked every day. My mom raised 8 of us, and they both went to daily mass. So they were our home was the Garden of Vocations, I think. My youngest brother's a Catholic priest at St. Pete's behind Capitol Hill. So he says that there's 2 in the family that have a religious vocation, the other 6 are religious. But my journey was circuitous because miraculously, and I say that because it was a miracle that I was able to get into medical school. Bill Cosby used to say some graduated magna cum laude and some summa, and I graduated thank you laude. So getting through med school, I joined the Army. I had no clue what I was doing, but it was a blessing in disguise. So I had served for the first part about 9 years, and then I didn't sign on the dotted. I didn't resign my commission. I said if there was ever a need, that I would like to be able to pay back what was ever given, because in those days I was a family physician, and life was fun and easy. I chose mission works, places like Korea, to get the taste of being away from my wonderful family to see if I could survive being far away. And then I had an experience in India working with a medical mission sister, and really felt that I wanted to pursue surgery, thinking that would be the best combo for working as a missionary. So it was a circuitous route. During that time, I had the blessing of scrubbing in on the open heart surgery of our Cardinal Hickey, who started the Catholic Healthcare Network and the clinic where I work presently, and he I hope one day will be canonized. He was a holy man. He became a spiritual friend after managing him post-operatively. And in those days, we did every other night call, so it wasn't this wimpy old 80-hour work week. So we worked a lot. And then I also had the blessing to meet with Mother Teresa. They wanted me to be her doctor, and it was really just a coming to completion when she came to Washington to reaffirm my vocation. But I was in the midst of searching for the world's best community in the world, and stumbled upon them after I finished my surgical residency in 2000, really like 2001. I was in the process of entering them when, now mind you, I had joined a reserve unit backed up Walter Reed Army Hospital. I mean, it was really basically easy money, reading my medical journals and using that money to be able to go serve the poor. I was working with the Catholic Medical Mission Board overseas to keep my surgical skills up, because Cardinal Hickey, as I was discerning my religious vocation, had recommended that I spend a half a day in prayer and a half a day serving the poor. And as a general surgeon, that's hard to juggle, especially here with malpractice insurance. So I did a lot of that service in Africa, where I could do a heavy load of cases in a short amount of time. And then it was September 10th, 2001, and I was up in Manhattan. That next morning, I was at the base of I was down in Manhattan. The Twin Towers fell, and by that afternoon, I was at the base of the towers, giving food and water to the firefighters with a couple of the missionaries of charity. So it was just another example of God saying, no, I have a plan for you. For everyone, He has a plan. And that was my little plan, to be His kind of litmus, his witness, and serving the poor. And so when I came back, I was able to enter the Little Workers and go through my formation. And then boom, after about 2003, the reservists started being pulled. And our Mother General, our general houses in Rome, and our sisters, many of them were freed, and the Italians love the Americans. They to this day say that we really freed them from a lot of their lack of religious freedom and freedom period during the Second World War. And the whole world was still in a state of shock with what happened with Al-Qaeda. So I, therefore, was able to do this little crazy juggle of, donning the military uniform. At the same time, I was a religious sister. And then I was deployed 3 times. And my last one was in Afghanistan, where I experienced a lot of things I'll share later. So that was it. I finally made final vows with the community, and so a few of them are there, wearing the same. You can pick them out. They're wearing the same. We shop at the same store together.
Well, let me follow that question up with this question. Now that you've told us a little bit about your journey, can you talk about how religious freedom around the world, since you've had a chance to be in places like Kenya, in Korea, and Egypt, can you talk about religious freedom or the lack thereof in many of the places where you have served the poor, and how that has affected your work?
Well, yes. I mean, I have been to places where I have seen people who they don't have the freedom of religion that I have experienced my whole life. And coming from our American life, I'm very open to my faith. I'm not the greatest missionary in the sense that I don't speak about it a lot. I try to do, was it St. Francis that said, go out and preach, and if you have to say a few words, go ahead. So I do a lot of it with taking care of them if they're sick. And it gives you a chance when you're at the bedside of a sick patient, and there's a real bonding with the patients where they share, and they know that you care about them, and they know our faith, because I always work at a Catholic hospital so that I can keep my spiritual batteries charged, which would be for us Catholics, the daily Eucharist, and maintaining the prayer life that we live as religious sisters. But when I was, I spent my most recent experiences in the Nuba Mountains of Sudan, and the people are being killed there, murdered. We received casualties. I've seen terrible things, arms blown off, children, because the people there in the Nuba Mountains of Sudan, which is bordering north and south, they live in peace. They live together of many religions, but the north, the Khartoum, people are bombing and using terrible forms of military action, to silent action, so that they swirl through and chop off limbs and fingers and faces and whatnot. And so I myself still live my religious life. I'm going to Mass every day, but receive these poor victims. And when I was in Afghanistan, before being deployed, we were told we can't talk about our faith. Because we were taking care of mostly, if it wasn't our U.S. soldiers, we would be taking care of people from the Muslim religion. But the word got out, because at that point I was now a full religious sister, but I wore I was a nun with a gun. No, I wore the uniform, so they didn't really know, except maybe my hairstyle looked really not so hot. And But I got to, some of the Afghani translators that were also physicians would ask me, are you a religious sister? And I said, well, this is my chance. I said, yes, do you know what that is? And they said, no. And I said, would you like me to explain that to you? And they said, yes. And I said, well, have you ever heard of Mother Teresa? I figured that would shorten the conversation. They said, no, we have never heard of Mother Teresa. And it really, at that point, it shocked me to realize how much people are being, well, I forget the word, but where you're not able to get the news of what's going on. So they're not being taught what other people are doing around the world. They're just given this one regime, and they're censored, was the word. And so I did share with them a little bit of the life that I live, of poverty and chastity. And the obedience one, I know, has always been a difficult one. But, it was really a wonderful experience because they could see with our military soldiers how much we really had a love in our heart. Because most military folks are very God-fearing, God-loving people. And so, and then we're there not only because we were given orders, but because we really want to help these people.
When I first talked to her on the phone, she said, I'm not sure what I can offer this panel. Okay, Tony, I'm back to you.
All right.
Now, you suggest something that's kind of outlandish here on the face of it, but you say religious organizations and leaders are often quick to support the infringement of liberty in the non-religious sector without realizing that such support actually works against them. Can you talk about that?
I have a great example of it, actually. I know this is partially sponsored by Georgetown, so this is going to maybe step on a few Catholic toes. But again, the general argument that I want to make, that I want to get across, that I see in my own research, is that the liberties, the rights that we have as religious organizations, as religious individuals, are equally important as those that are in the regular commercial market that we think that we see, and that we can't compartmentalize these two and just focus on religious liberty and ignore the other liberties, and in some ways work against those other liberties. Because if we move against the secular world and try to regulate it and restrict some of the liberties of individuals in that frame, it's going to come back and haunt us. And this is a statement from Cardinal Francis George, who's the Archbishop of Chicago. He made this on May 20th, 2012. And this was in relation to the Affordable Care Act. And he writes, since 1919, the Catholic bishops of the United States have taught that universal access to basic health care is a component of the common good in a fair society. Now, that sounds wonderful. I love to see people around me healthy and happy, and so it's a very good thing. I see what the sister does here. She does really wonderful things to make sure that people who are in distress, who are sick, who are ill, are cared for. So far, so good. In the Church's teaching on social justice, concern for universal health care takes its place with concern that everyone have sufficient food and decent shelter and an opportunity for a job with a family wage. The Bishops' Conference therefore supported the goal of the health care reform bill that was passed a year ago at the time. It has many elements that contribute to extending health care for all. The provision that insurance companies cannot impose pre-existing conditions as a restriction on offering health insurance policies. The provision that sons and daughters can remain covered by their parents' insurance through their college years. Increased coverage of health benefits for mothers and their children. So again, what he's saying at this point is that we supported the Affordable Care Act. We supported restrictions on various businesses, on various insurance companies, on various individuals, that they should have this, that, and the other thing. It's a regulation. It was restricting their liberty. Here's the payoff line. But these and other benefits should not be brought at the expense of religious liberty and the freedom of conscience. Freedom of conscience means that neither an institution nor an individual should be coerced by the government into doing or paying for an action they believe to be immoral. This was a big awakening, I think, for the Catholic Church. Because what was happening was that, yes, let's get the government greater involved in healthcare. For wonderful reason. We want to see everybody healthy, and it seems like it's going to be a good idea if we pass the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. It has a nice name, after all. And so we're going to restrict and tell insurance companies what to do. We're going to restrict businesses and tell them what they can do. But when it comes to our turf, all of a sudden it was whoa, whoa, whoa. But the big realization here is what's good for the goose is also good for the gander, right? Is that you're asking for freedom in one area, but denying it to those in the other area, is a critical mistake that we can often slip into. And it's not surprising that this came about. Because again, as you decrease liberties in some area, you're going to increase the coercive power of the state. And that state is going to use that power eventually to restrict your own liberties. You might not think so. You think they're doing everything for good and causes, but it does come around. It does come around to bite you. And I think that's what is important here. And for religious liberty folks, for people who are very interested in religious liberty, the big issue here is to respect the liberties of others because they will join your cause as well. So religious liberty should be good for business as well, because the liberties that churches enjoy to be able to proselytize, to do the things that they do, to enjoy the gifts that God gave them and to do it to their free will and to their utmost is exactly what the folks at Hobby Lobby are doing. And, you know, for me, this compartmentalization, and we heard this in the previous panel, and this drove me crazy. Is that, well, we'll carve out exemptions for this thing or that thing. We'll create this big overarching regulation. We'll carve out, restrict liberties here and there, but then we'll carve out an exemption for this one based upon religious liberty or exemption here and based upon that. I mean, the way I view it is that, you know, God gave us all a bunch of different gifts, and when we do our daily business, we're doing that all the time, whether it's, you know, selling, you know, frames that they do at Hobby Lobby and macrame projects and all those kind of things, or if you're in your church on a Sunday morning, it's all the same thing there. And the religious liberty that is really important for religion and that we advocate for we advocate so strongly for has to be translated over to other individuals because they need that liberty too.
Brian, in your work, you state that religious hostilities, violence, and conflict are all on the rise, and of course, many people have cited that. Could you give us, I know, and Tom gave us a stat at the outset, could you give us some more data on just how bad the situation is and how it's changed over time?
Yeah, so in the past 6 years, we've been seeing a steady rise both of government restrictions on religion and social hostilities involving religion around the world. These rates, by some measures, they're going up by 2, 3, 4 times what they were just 5 or 6 years ago. For instance, harassment of women over what they dress, how they dress religiously, has gone up by nearly 8 times just in 6 years. So we're seeing, you know, more than a third of countries these incidents are happening. In more than 1 out of every 4 countries, governments themselves restrict religious conversion. So thinking about some of the other arguments that have been made and that Becky that you were making, is that when governments start interfering in just that basic choice of whether or not I would like to change my faith, you know, it's not about proselytism, but just even that freedom to make a choice, you know, these are very deadening types of restrictions. And many times these kinds of restrictions are justified because they want to try to reduce the tensions that come over religious change. But if I can I flip my data around a little bit? Because for the past 12 years I've been studying this, and everywhere I go and speak about this, it's always talking about, well, here are the problems. You know, this leads to this, and here's the problem. And I just came from Brazil, and I've taken a different approach there, where my sort of pyramid of here's all the countries with all the high restrictions, and then the very high, you know, sort of moderate. That's in the U.S. is in this moderate category, and then countries with low restrictions. And I was sitting with Brazil's vice president, Michael Temer, and, you know, going through the data with him. And I said, but, you know, these are the 25 most populous countries, and I had the top of the paper folded over. And he looked at it and he said, but where's Brazil? And I said, oh, here it is. And I unfolded the top. I said, Brazil has the lowest government restrictions on religion of any country among the 25 most populous. And he sat there, and it was a big conference table with aides and folks around. And he said, I didn't know that. I mean, I'm the vice president. I didn't know that. And I should know that, he said, because I'm a constitutional lawyer, and nothing wrong with lawyers. And so he said, I helped write the religious freedom provisions for Brazil. This is great news. And I say this because this is the case that proves the opposite side of the story. Now, some of you may know this, but Brazil is a country that has undergone more religious change than perhaps any in the past 50 years. 50 some years ago, everybody in Brazil was at least nominally Catholic. Today, only 2/3 of people are Catholic. And what have they become? Well, a few have become, no faith, but most have become Pentecostals, charismatics, evangelicals, Latter-day Saints, Seventh-day Adventists. A whole variety of faiths have sprung up. And, as I talk about these things with different leaders around the world, and I use the Brazil case study, I say, can you imagine this happening in Pakistan? That 1/3 of the country changed their religion? I said, okay, then they say, oh, well, this is just within Christianity, it's no big deal. Well, there have been wars, long wars fought over this in Europe. So I said, okay, let me give another analogy. What if this would happen in Iran, where it's Shia majority? What if 1/3 of Iranians would switch and become Sunni? Or maybe even something even further out, Ibadi, like they are in Oman. You can't imagine this kind of religious change happening violence-free. There is no violence. And Brazil's economy is booming. The country is optimistic. Skyscrapers are going up. I mean, they have problems like the rest of us. But, it's a success story of how this model, what the data are saying sort of on the opposite side. So that's part of the story, I think, in this, that maybe our panel is saying, and the whole story here is that when you do have religious freedom, there's a really good side to it. There's plenty of bad that happens in business. There's corruption. There's businesses, plow down the Amazon, and there's things that people can criticize business for. But there's also this positive side.
Well, wouldn't you argue that as a part of the religious economy model, there's competition?
There's competition.
So the Catholic Church now has competition, and now the Protestants have competition with other Protestants that are Pentecostal, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and I sat down with Cardinal Orani, who wasn't a cardinal when I first met him. He just became a cardinal on the 22nd of February. So he's the Cardinal of Rio de Janeiro. And
After he met with you.
Yeah.
Good job.
I was the last,
Okay.
I was the checking, I was percent. Anyhow, I sat with him, and we're going to have a big awards project in 2016 at the Rio Olympics, awarding the companies around the world that have had the best initiatives for respecting religious freedom in their company or in their society or in the world, sort of in their weight class, multinationals, nationals, companies led by women, young entrepreneurial companies. And Cardinal Orani just sat there and he said, this is exciting. We're in, whatever needs to be done, you can count on us. And he said, but I have a question. He said, now this isn't, because I'm Catholic, so he thought, well, maybe this is some Catholic initiative. And I said, no, everything we're doing is completely multi-faith. For Muslims, where this is a big issue, and it's unknown, but once Muslims hear about it, they realize that religious freedom is a big issue for their businesses. And he just said, this is great. This is our stance as a church. So it's hard to understand, but when I was in Brazil earlier in the year and spoke at a religious freedom event, 30,000 people came out for a religious freedom event.
Just like your normal talks.
Yeah,
right here in the
just
States.
normal, normal talks. But they've embraced it, and the church itself, which you could consider a loser they lost a lot of people. But when I talk to, priests and others, they lament that, but at the same time they say, well, why did we lose them? Maybe we weren't meeting their needs. And would the best solution have been to clamp down and prevent people, or to allow us to now see we need to engage and serve people better? So I think it's, the data, flipping the data around and looking at the positive case studies is at least for me, been very enlightening, and I think people respond to that message. It's, it's sort of my tagline is religious freedom is good for business, and that's a simple statement, but it's very true.
Sure. Now, Becky, I'm going to skip ahead because of what Brian was just saying and ask you this question. The religious landscape is changing all around the world. A lot of people would have us to believe that worlds are becoming less religious all the time, much more secular, but in fact, many parts of the world are becoming more religious. And a part of that is the whole conversion process. And so a lot of your research that you've done, especially in India, you've actually studied conversion. And if you could talk to us about the issue of religious freedom and conversion for a little bit, that would be helpful.
Well, absolutely. When people think about religious freedom, I guess what they don't think about is the people who benefit from religious freedom, who are very much on the margins. The very, very poor, the women, the outcasts in India who I work with and study. And yes, I do want to talk about a specific aspect, which is the right to convert, which is severely under threat in India as we speak, because in a few weeks, India will hold elections, and perhaps for the first time will elect a prime minister who is, I'm going to say, will probably be one of the most restrictive prime ministers on the Christian community and conversion in particular. And I just want to cite two examples from my study. I've studied hundreds of micro-entrepreneurs in India, in South Sudan, sister, and in Peru, Latin America. But I'll concentrate in India for a moment because I study very poor women who are Dalits, who are outcasts. The poorest of the poor, the lowest caste. And my study has shown that the women who can convert, right now they can convert, thank God, benefit in two very important ways. We've seen that the converts in our community are more likely than any other group to report domestic violence. Now, people who are necessarily the constituents who are against religious freedom, who probably lobby against religious freedom, probably be lobbying tomorrow against the Hobby Lobby, and what would they say if these women, because of their connection with forms of Pentecostal Christianity, Protestant Christianity, connects them with a pastor, and these women, interestingly enough, report their abuse not just to their friends, they report it to a male pastor. And who's better to deal with a drunken, violent husband than a male pastor who goes to visit the home and over time can stop this abuse? They're plugged into open, warm, welcoming communities. This is what conversion does for these women. What we've also seen is that the converts are able to, many people believe, let me go back here, that microcredit, a mere access to credit, will launch the poor out of poverty. All they need is credit. We found that it isn't just the mere access to credit. What in fact credit does is that it can drive people further into debt. You have more money, there are more temptations, you use your loan to get another loan, and before you know it, you're so much in debt. What we found, the women who are converts, who are connected with these communities, who tithe, religiously motivated given, they tithe, and some of these women make such a little, but they tithe 10% of their income, and they tithe it before they buy their groceries. Believe that. Try and imagine that. They tithe. It actually works as a sort of a constraint. It limits them, it prevents them. It's a self-control mechanism. It prevents them from wasting their money. One of the clients I met, may I just mention really quickly, was able to save to build a 2-story house, has a refrigerator. I wish we had a PowerPoint. I would show her standing behind a shiny refrigerator, a washing machine. There's no running water. She pours a bucket of water but washes her clothes. Has a two-wheeler. Has a shop which he's expanded now and sells many things apart from just candies. Because she tells me, and we've tracked her income, she joined this community where she saved significant amount of money by not gambling. She used to gamble about 2,000 rupees of her income every month, what we call chit funds. But she stopped gambling, she put that aside. And you know why she put that aside, Byron? Because she knew that she had to limit her money, her wasteful spending, because she had to tithe. She had promised to tithe. So conversion can uplift, it doesn't subjugate. I don't believe it's repressive. I believe it's progressive. And these women, these converts that I've met, have shown me in ways far more remarkable and unbelievable in the ways in which conversion can transform. So I pray for my country, because conversion is bringing these marginal people, uplifting them. It's good economics. Anti-conversion, poor economics.
Now, Sister Dee Dee, you've traveled all over the world. Following up that comment there by Becky, what would you say, as you've worked with the poor in all these different places, about religious restrictions that you've observed and how that affects the poor?
Well, I think we have a situation here in our own country where I work, and it's not a definite, but it's a fear that because we are a clinic that serves the poor completely, so 50% of the patients that we serve at the Spanish Catholic Center are undocumented. The other 50% possibly could get the affordable health care, and we call it Obamacare. And there's a risk or a fear that we could lose the grant money that we receive. We rely heavily on grant money. And I'm always amazed at money. These are non-governmental donors, but I'm always amazed at the amount of money that is given to an organization like Planned Parenthood, which provides women health care in a very specific way, where our clinic provides the whole gamut of internal medicine. We do mammograms, they don't. We provide all sorts of care, and we do not receive money from the government. I think that's correct, Mary? Is that right? A little bit, poke. But Planned Parenthood will get over $1 million a day of tax money to keep them alive. I fear that we will not survive without the donors' money, and there's a threat that we could lose it if we don't embrace the Affordable Health Care Act of accepting patients that have that, receive that income. Because our focus is the poor, the people that fall through the cracks, that don't have Medicaid or Medicare. We take care of people who can't really afford that or aren't allowed to have it. And so that's the one fear. The other fear is that there's going to be red flags of those who don't have the affordable health care programs. That'll tell them that they are probably undocumented. So I think we're going to run into a crisis with our poor here in our own country that the God has. I mean, I'm not promoting people sneaking across the border, but people flee from their country, and they've been here, a lot of them have been here for a long time. So that's a big fear. Did I answer that question?
Yeah. Okay. Tony, question for you. You're a social scientist, so you talk a lot about correlation, and every now and again we're bold enough to talk about causation. And in one of your papers, you map out 6 different models for religious liberty. And we don't have enough time for you to go into all 6 of those, but if you could talk about a causal connection between economic development and religious liberty, it'd be great to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, the connection between There are a number of different pathways, and this is part of the Religious Freedom Project that we're doing right now, working with a number of great scholars, some of whom here flank me, talking about, is there a connection between religious liberty and economic development, as well as social flourishing and democracy more generally. And a couple of the ones that I've heard here, the ones that we can see taking place, both with Sister Dee Dee and the stories that Becky have told here, relate to the building of what we call human capital and civic skills. I mean, the stories that I hear are just so wonderful. A lot of people, and you heard this implicitly in some of the earlier panels today. Well, if the businesses will never reach out and provide health care for their workers, or they won't care for their workers, so we have to come in and do these things. You can't leave it to the private sector. But here you have these wonderful stories of once religious organizations are freed to do the work that God calls them to do, they step up to the plate and do these amazing, wonderful things. Right, with the stuff that Becky's talking about here at at the micro level, just little tiny things that they weren't able to do before, but now are able to do, make small changes in their life, build the skills of these women, of these Dalits in India that lead not to major expansions and growth, but step by step, everything gets better, and it's going to get better over time. And the work that Sister Dee Dee does, just going out there and say, we're going to help people, give us the freedom to do that. And again, it builds organizations, it helps people out, and builds these civic skills that reverberate throughout society, which we see that in our own research here, in our own experiences, that it's just absolutely amazing that, to think, why wouldn't religious liberty be a good thing? You're allowed to find your own true God-given skills and explore those. The other pathway that I tend to hang my hat on a lot is, and as I've talked about this before, is the issue of contingent liberties, right? It's this realization that, and I think churches, and I think the Catholic Church is coming around to realize this now too, is that our liberties are contingent upon a number of other liberties, not just that small compartmentalized religious liberty, and that yes, it might be difficult. Liberty is, as Becky says, not a panacea. There's a lot of bad things that might come when people are free, but I think overwhelmingly we see people step up to the plate and do wonderful things. And to the extent that we can provide freedom for all individuals and not just religious groups, and these religious groups saying that my liberty is contingent upon somebody else's liberty, and that makes me stronger. This is the work that Brian has seen in Brazil, right? This is through his research, is that yeah, the liberty might lose us some converts. It might be difficult. It might create some social problems. But overall, it makes us stronger in the long run. And so we see that. We see as religious groups come to realize that their property rights are being violated. Freedom of conscience, freedom to contract is being violated. They become a voice. They become advocates for liberty writ large. And as liberty expands throughout society, societies grow. We know that historically. I don't know how you can deny that. And so, let religious liberty ring and allow us to build these civic skills and allow us to reach out to other individuals and support their freedoms and liberties as well.
Byron, can I just make a quick point? I mean, Tony mentioned the efficiency of faith-based organizations. And of course, I just want to make this really quickly. There was an experiment, and I was reading an economics journal, where these two secular Swedish economists, now Swedes are no fans of religion, are they now, really? Let's be honest. Two Swedish economists did an experiment in healthcare clinics in Uganda. It's a peer-reviewed, serious economics paper. It's got all the econometrics in it. And they gave them some money. They gave the faith-based clinics money, and they gave secular clinics money. The faith-based healthcare clinics in Uganda use the money to increase the quality of their care, lower the cost of provision, and basically extend the reach of their services. The secular clinics jacked up their wages and used it for other prerequisites. So, and the World Bank has put out a report last year that says that even though faith-based organizations hold a very small share of the market, people will walk for miles in Africa, and Uganda they did this study, to get to these faith-based clinics. They do a better job. So this is just to tie in with the pathway that Tony mentioned.
Following up on that, Brian, Can you talk about correlation, causation between religious freedom and these examples of hostility that you talked about a second ago, where religious freedom goes down or where religious freedom goes up? What do we see in terms of hostilities and conflict?
Yeah, so maybe one example I can focus on Pakistan and sort of give a positive example at the end. But in Pakistan, blasphemy is illegal. That means if you say something, do something, perhaps even think something that's critical of God, it's a capital offense. You can be put to death. It's that's the penalty for that. And this type of law is justified because we don't want, the justification is, well, we don't want you to say something that might offend her, and vice versa. The religious sensitivities are so important. We need to protect ourselves from hurting each other's feelings. Therefore, we're going to criminalize blasphemy and then keep that problem down. And then what the data show, and this is a global analysis, is exactly the opposite. So when you institute these laws that are purportedly trying to keep religious sensitivities from being hurt, instead, those are used to stoke tensions. So if I can give a business example, so in Pakistan, a number of companies have come under allegations of blasphemy from their business rivals. So a business rival who's, we can undercut them. Well, their advertisement showed, too much leg, or, that's blasphemous, or they said something that, wasn't quite right. That's blasphemous. And can you imagine for those in business, getting drug into court for blasphemy? But that happens. So these laws then get used as ways, and then you have many cases where there's false accusations, and then when somebody is accused and the judges throw the court case out, then vigilante violence comes in and says, you offended our sensibilities, this is what happens, and then they're killed. So on a positive, can I give a little bit of positive? Much of the work I've done for decades has looked at these problems. And I was, a few months ago, I met with people from the Evangelical Lutheran Church, which is the main church in Finland. And they came and we were talking about how religious hostilities towards minorities in Pakistan, Ahmadiyya Muslims, for instance, and Christians in Pakistan, it's majority Sunni Muslim, but even Shia are a minority there, and there's tensions there. And they were talking about, what could be done? And then the idea came up, well, maybe there's some things businesses could do. And I've never seen people just drop and say, that's a new idea. And they said, that's the first encouraging idea we've heard, and they've been working in Pakistan for many decades, that we've heard. And of course, I didn't know why it was so positive to them. But then as we met, and I met with their ambassador in Helsinki, and they just closed their embassy because of these religious security situations so bad. And I told them a bit about Tibet. And there's a researcher in Lausanne, Switzerland, who has been going to Tibet, and I think many of you know the issues in Tibet. And he has been helping Tibetan Buddhists develop the tourist industry for this influx of Han Chinese tourists coming from China to see Tibet. And this researcher was sharing this at the Human Rights Council, and the Chinese had just vehemently objected to a Uyghur from Xinjiang who was talking about problems in the Muslim area of China. And so I was sure the Chinese delegation would, again, point of order and try to shut this Tibet talk down. But the Chinese delegation, they just sat there and they got relaxed. And then next thing I know, they're nodding their heads because he's talking about helping Tibetan Buddhists celebrate their religion, their culture, by becoming the tour guides, having bed and breakfast, having tourists, and fixing up the monasteries, and what the Chinese call it, not being splittist, but instead, cooperating and doing something. And then I shared this in Finland, with the ambassadors from the former and then the current ambassador of Finland to Pakistan. And then all of a sudden they said, well, you know who the Christians are in Pakistan? They're Dalits. They're converts from Hinduism, the Dalits. And so they said, well, you know, they're thought of as the garbage collectors of Pakistan. And then the business idea clicked in. It's, well, Pakistan has really bad waste management, and there's not much recycling. We could go in and help develop some waste management that would be very profitable. The country would love it, the Christians could run the business, and the Muslim community and everyone else would think, this is great, you know, we don't want to touch, you know, they're the Dalits, let them take care of it. But then they could use that negative stereotype, turn it around into a sustainable business that serves the country. So I think, you know, that's sort of the new, you know, I think that's what the data, it's not exactly all from the data, but when you start looking at the data from, okay, here's all the problems and what leads to problems, then what might lead to solutions? And so that's what I mentioned at the very beginning when I said it's not just that religious freedom is good for business, but then business can be good for religious freedom.
Well,
And
we're gonna-
could I just jump in on what Brian said here, because it echoes a lot of the work that I've done earlier on. One of the great arguments against religious liberty has been that it would create a lot of chaos and a lot of conflict and tension. And that oftentimes does arise in the short term. I've seen some of this in my own research in Latin America, but as Brian just mentioned here, over time, Brazil realizes, all in Brazil, that everybody gets strengthened. The Catholic Church is stronger because of the evangelicals. The evangelicals are stronger because of the Pentecostals. It works to really enhance each organization. We think about the beneficiaries in terms of the organizations, but the people who actually benefit are the individual consumers of religion. The parishioners have now so many better options and people working for them, just as it is in business. McDonald's benefits because there's a Dairy Queen across the street, and it's the consumer at the very end, the consumer sovereignty and free markets that really rules the day that tends to benefit there. So it's a beautiful thing. And I should, you know, hasten to say that Baptist basketball has improved immensely because of Catholic competition. So thank you. Let freedom
Okay,
ring.
we have one more question for Becky and one more question for Sister Dee Dee, and then we'll open up to the floor. So Becky, the question, you've studied entrepreneurship. So can you give us some insights about what you've learned in terms of entrepreneurship among the poor? And then can you quickly follow that up with what you're finding about high net worth entrepreneurs as well?
Well, I've had the privilege of interviewing micro entrepreneurs, and I'm not going to do it like this. I'm going to say micro entrepreneurs and high net worth entrepreneurs. It's really been an honor because I've learned a lot about religious freedom and business from both these groups. With poor entrepreneurs, I made my point earlier about credit. You know, credit alone is not enough, but it really is really not enough. Because what I've learned from poor entrepreneurs is that they are aspiring entrepreneurs. They need the credit, but they need to be plugged into Christian networks. They need in India, these were very important, the religious networks. They need to have networks and controls on spending so that the credit that they get, this injection of funds. I mean, there's been a lot of work recently decrying microcredit. It's useless, it doesn't work. And really, in economics term, one needs a significant injection of funds to really scale a business up. You know, you're selling omelets on a cart. I mean, how could you really support your family? You need a serious amount of money. But why are some of the entrepreneurs that I'm seeing succeeding? Because they are using the funds that they have and investing it carefully. They're self-controlled, they're exercising their willpower, they have hope. Hope is very important. It's not just belief that something's going to be okay. I call it religiously motivated hope that the future is good. I'm going to invest in the future. I'm going to educate my daughter because guess what? She's going to get a job. So that's what I've learned from poor entrepreneurs. What I've learned from high net worth entrepreneurs is wonderful. I wish I could tell you my Quaker story. I had it all ready. But I have studied the Quakers, and I've learned from the Quakers is that they were a religious minority. They were persecuted. Okay, well, many people wanted to persecute them, but the British didn't persecute them. They let them be. They were a pesky group, you know. They wouldn't swear oaths, they didn't fight. So all they had was business. So they went into business and they set up these businesses, and because of their commitment, they were strong Christians. Because of their commitment to the truth and to honesty, they set a price, they fixed a price. For example, if you walked into a shop and you saw a bar of chocolate, Cadbury's, Roundtrees, Clark shoes, many people, my husband told me, don't mention English things, nobody will understand. But you all know Cadbury's, Roundtrees. And when a person walked into a shop and saw a bar of chocolate, he or she didn't have to haggle. Weber called it, they got rid of the need for Oriental bargaining. Now, I'm from the Orient, I know bargaining. But what I've learned from high entrepreneurs, so they were innovative. See, their faith enabled them to be innovative. They set a price, and they were innovative, and they succeeded, wildly succeeded. I mean, they were very successful. British Rail, the whole works, name it. But what I saw but you may say, that's centuries ago. But I've seen from the hundreds of entrepreneurs that I've interviewed recently in this country, in emerging economies, that they are using their faith-inspired principles to put their faith, their principles before profit, and people before profit. Thank you. I've interviewed, and one of my entrepreneurs has given me permission to mention his name. He's a wonderful civil engineer whose name is Nehemiah, and he runs a very large corporation in Malaysia building walls, Nehemiah's walls. And he decided, because of his faith, he was not going to bribe. He was not going to bribe at all. Imagine not bribing in the construction industry in Malaysia or in India. Unimaginable, right? But he decided not to bribe. It hurt him in the short run, but he absolutely stood by it. He's transforming this industry. He used the time when he was not getting any tenders because he wasn't bribing to develop an excellent product. Walter Stuff calls it the moral imperative of good design. Fancy, but he put his energy into building a fabulous product. He's now a leader, but religious freedom enables these entrepreneurs, and I've met numerous ones. I haven't interviewed the Greens, and I'd like to once they've done with their business up the road. But I've met many of them in this country, in this wonderful country, where religious freedom has allowed them to be innovative. And you know, I just can't imagine if they didn't have that freedom, and it's fast eroding for my friend Nehemiah in Malaysia. I can't imagine what he would do, what the country would do without someone like him. What religious freedom has done for the industry, for business. So that's what I've learned for entrepreneurs. I've learned a lot.
Well, I don't think you'll be disappointed when you get a chance to interview the Greens.
I won't be. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, our last question before we open the floor up. I was reading articles about Sister Dee Dee because she's famous. And so there's so many quotes, but there was one of them where she describes herself not only as a pro-life doctor, but a pro-eternal life doctor in the work that she does to the poor. Tell us about that.
Well, believe it or not, the Hippocratic Oath, which physicians swear, which your son will be swearing to, said in 300 BC that we would not procure an abortion. It was a very lengthy quote, swearing that doctors do, and that we would not procure an abortion. And sadly, in when I was graduating from medical school at Georgetown, we actually voted to say, which would you like to say that you would not procure an abortion, or would you to delete that? And sadly, it was like little over 50% said take it out, and I was crushed. So I privately said that I would not ever do an abortion, and I realized then that we were in those earlier years that there was going to be a big problem. So I say that I'm a pro-life physician, and sadly, because you have to really, find that out with a lot of med students and doctors and educate. So I want to educate that life begins at the moment of conception, not at the point of implantation, which now the American College of OB is trying to say, so that it's a human life. And as a Christian Catholic, that life means not only just the beginning of the beauty of what we are all made in the image and likeness of God, but that a soul, we are now carry the image of Christ with a soul. We are made in a remarkable way, and so to take that life away is murder, is at the earliest form. So I wanted to be a defender of those most vulnerable, whether it's the poor or the unborn. So to really share that with any medical person or anyone who's in the battlefront of the pro-life movement. So I'm pro-life, pro-eternal life in the sense that I have to share this a long time ago with Mary, our medical director out there, that I not only, that life is actually very easy, that I want to save my soul, or God saves us, but I do the best I can to save my soul and to bring as many people as I can with me. So in the clinic where I work, I'm a general surgeon. I take care of all the surgical problems, but I also do a lot of teaching of chastity. We have a lot of people who are not living. Our patients are, many of them are Christian. If they're Catholic, they're in big trouble because I tell them that, yes, you get bargain basement surgery from us at the Spanish. What's the second word? And they'll say Catholic. I said, yes. So I get to also, you get to hear my lecture, but I'm going to take care of your hernia first. When you come back, I'm going to tell you why living with your girlfriend is wrong in the eyes of God. And so I do a lot of that teaching because life is more than just what we have here. There's an eternity that we're all, this life that is with God, that's we're all, I pray, will be there together, celebrating together. So I'm pro-life and pro-eternal life, but I can't give what I don't have. It's like being on the airplane. When the oxygen drops, they tell you first to put the oxygen on yourself, then you can take care of others. So I cannot give and teach faith without my own life. So I'm blessed as a religious sister to be with a wonderful community that's very traditional. We live in a community life. We pray together morning mass. We pray 4 times a day, and so that I can keep my batteries recharged. We have Eucharistic adoration, and I'm able to try to share the faith to, not proselytizing, but really just saying, sort of throwing a little cold water on them to say that they're going off on a direction that's not life-giving for Christ. And that if they can, and I get a lot of them that they'll go to confession as part of my prescription if they're Catholic. If you're not Catholic, you're in better shape with me because I don't try to push my Catholic faith on anyone. But I do think that many Christian faiths do believe that living together is not right. Abortion is wrong. The contraceptive thing, I don't push that on our non-Catholics. I explain to them, though, how the birth control pill works, how the intrauterine device works, that it takes away the life of a baby. We don't really know how the birth control pill works. And so I educate them, and they can come to their own conclusion that this hormone in their body is not a good thing for them. It increases the risk of breast cancer and uterine cancer, and it separates their marriages. It puts a big wedge in the relationship between the husband and the wife. And so I go through all that, which is why I'm usually backed up in my clinic. So I'm pro-life and pro-eternal life, and can't wait till we're all together celebrating.
Okay, we're going to open up for questions. I see some hands going up in the back. Please identify yourself so we can get that on tape.
Hello. My name is John Carr, and I'm part of a new initiative here in Georgetown on Catholic social thought and public life. I very much share the premise of the panel that religious freedom is good for the poor and good for business. I share the experience that faith-based groups treat people with greater dignity, often use money more effectively. But I am profoundly uncomfortable with the moral equivalence between religious freedom and economic freedom, between the rights of religious groups and the rights of business. One is protected by the Constitution, the other is, and in fact, regulation is mandated by the Constitution. We can have a debate about what's right and what's wrong. But you quoted Tony Cardinal George on the Catholic bishops in the pursuit of health care. This is a religious community that provides health care for millions, pays for health care for millions, picks up the pieces of a system that doesn't provide health care for millions, and has every right to add its voice to the debate of how to cover 50 million people without health care, and to pretend that our voluntary efforts will in fact provide that is not based in either reality or, frankly, anything else. The easy equivalence between religious rights and commercial rights, I think, is a very bad idea for religious rights. My own experience, a lot of talk about how business helps protect religious freedom. I find American business quite comfortable doing their work in Saudi Arabia and China, where religious freedom is thoroughly and completely outlawed, where a bishop just died after 20 years under house arrest. So I think there is a lot to be said for the ways in which religious freedom creates an environment in which many institutions, including economic institutions, can thrive. But I think it would be a terrible mistake to reduce religious freedom to one more page in the Libertarian Handbook. The idea that the market is the answer to all of our problems, whether it's religious, economic, or political, is not one the church has embraced, certainly not one that Pope Francis is offering at this time. And he thinks our faith, which ought to be protected because it comes from God, protected because it's part of the Constitution, allows us to advocate for a different kind of economic life that leaves fewer behind.
Tony, Brian, both of you want to take
A couple points on that. Then don't be disappointed when you start advocating for a bigger state and it comes down to say you have to do this because, hey, that's what you want. You get the government that you advocate for. And in terms of individuals not being able to provide, or these private institutions, including commercial enterprises, not being able to provide for individuals, I have a much more optimistic view of human nature and see the work of Sister Dee Dee and see the work that all these, Becky has talked to a lot of individuals about, and these people that Brian meet. It's amazing what people can do when they're given the freedom to do that. And I'm very concerned that we want to aggregate or concentrate power and tell people how to do, because it's a small group of people deciding the decisions for a wide array of people when they don't know how those people actually live or what they want, and that disturbs me. And as far as the Catholic thought that's in there, all I say is subsidiarity, baby.
Do you want me to say something about China?
Did you want to throw something?
Yeah, China and Saudi Arabia are both excellent points, places I've spent a lot of time and continue to spend time. So Saudi Arabia, one thing's in common between the two, they're living off of resources from the ground. So Saudi Arabia's economic success has been from oil, and China's from cheap labor. And that's been the drivers of their economies. And so the question, and I take your points very well, but the question I have for China is, is China the place that companies want to put their R&D departments? Is that the place where people can imagine the future of development that's going to carry us into the next century? And most business people say, no, that's the place where we can make gadgets pretty cheaply. And these other sort of locks on the minds of people and communications and speech and thought actually, are costs that are going to inhibit the future of business. So I think that's a discussion that's worth having. So that's the kind of work that I think needs to be done, and I think this project's doing it, is just to bring these things up and let people talk about them. So for instance, in Milan in 2015 is the next World Expo, and we'll be having a business, faith, and freedom global forum where businesses, I really like this panel. It's really, I feel the oddball here, right, a little bit. But it's such an interesting panel because this idea in Milan is to have religious leaders, business leaders, academics, politicians, I'll just pseudo-represent them for the time being, sit together and talk about these things, because that's part of what religious freedom is, just being able to talk about this and find our way forward. So I think that, I mean, Byron, congratulations, and Tom and Tim for putting this very interesting panel together, and I've enjoyed being part of it. But I think that that's, you know, your questions really are the kind that need to be raised and discussed.
Yes, sir. The gentleman right here with the blue shirt.
Hi, my name is Martin Waugh. I'm with the Amen Clinic, and I have to give a disclaimer. I go to the Catholic Church now where her brother is the priest. But I grew up Methodist in a little town in western Kansas, and I went to Oral Roberts because he was Methodist, didn't know he was Pentecostal, and that's where I picked up my wife 31 years ago. So that was a good pick. But what I'd like to ask Professor Grimm, there's no defense against love. I hope you can add on your questionnaire about how many people feel loved by the Catholic Church. And I'll tell you why. I went to Billy Graham's house not too long ago, and I said, boy, you and John Paul changed the world. And he said with like gleam in his eyes, I love John Paul. Did you know he invited me to Poland to do a crusade? And I said, no, do tell. And he talked all about it. And, you know, I submit that maybe he was converted like I was. John Paul coming to the Lutherans and saying, it is in death and resurrection whereby we are saved. And I saw him do it in '99, and I just went, what's going on? And then, you know, further, I saw Benedict say, and we do believe Christ is in your places and tables. And so I see a conversion going on that's not recorded well, but I see it and have lived it myself. We've taught Sunday school for the last 8 years, and I think there ought to be a better way to ask the question, like maybe, do you feel loved by the people of faith around you, or something like that? What do you think about that?
Oh, no, that's a great question, and I think part of my own spiritual pilgrimage, which I won't go into, you know, echoes that. And a lot of what's motivated me, this may sound strange, as a social scientist, is this idea that love is really the love is the answer. I mean, that's a trite. It sounds trite, but that's really the key ingredient to many things. And so I've tried in my work on all these topics is to keep that in mind, that's the element that's the glue. And so I think that your question is really thought-provoking. Maybe Becky, you have some surveys coming up. Maybe we can talk about.
We do ask people from different faith traditions in my study, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, do you feel that God loves you personally and has a plan for your life? Obviously, I was told that I shouldn't ask two things, but we did 3 tranches with it. But we always got the answer from the converts, absolutely. Kandipa in Tamil. You know, it's a sort of an exclamation, absolutely. Yeah, maybe. In some of the others, you know. So yes, we do ask this question, the belief that there is someone, the transcendent loves you for who you are is radical. It's a radical thing.
And if I can just jump in, Becky asked me the other day, you asked if I have any questions for your survey. And this gets at it, but it's in a social science way. The best measures of religious freedom among a population, the questions that I've heard of, are when you ask these 2 questions in tandem. First, is it important for you to live in a country where you can practice your religion freely? And then follow it up with a second question, is it important for you to live in a country where others can practice their religion freely? And that difference between those 2 questions, when asked back to back, is very revealing, because I've called that the intolerance gap, but it could actually be a love gap. So I think there are some ways to get at, because, you know, just to love somebody enough to say, I care about you and what you want to do, that is an act of love.
Well, would you please join me? I think we're out of time in thanking our great panel.